Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I am here at Black Barn Farm in Stanley, Victoria, and I'm going to talk to Jade and Charlie about their regen orchard. So first of all, could you tell us a bit about yourselves and what got you into farming, and specifically regen farming?
Let you start.
Okay, well, both Jade and I
closer,
grew up on small farms, so both parents weren't full-time farmers, but part-time farmers and hobby farmers. So I guess we've always been on a small amount of land. I studied geology at uni. I loved learning about natural systems and natural processes and studied to become a geologist. And graduating started with the Department of Agriculture, and that really obviously mixed the two for me. So I was working for the state government in agriculture and then applying that to geology. And we were living up here actually in Stanley at another little house that was surrounded by an apple orchard. And we saw that apple orchard get pushed out. And that for me was, quite an emotive thing, and was quite sad. It was a family-owned orchard and Stanley was full of them and they were all getting pushed out. And it made me start asking questions about our food system and why small farms weren't viable. And I always thought I'd get into livestock, but it was probably that and loving cool climates.
I didn't know you thought you'd get into livestock.
Yeah, when I wanted to get into farming,
he's not.
I thought I wanted to grow cattle and move to the Upper Murray, which is what I wanted to
do. Maybe I thwarted that plan.
It was then being up here in Stanley, which is an orcharding community, and I loved growing my own fruit, and it was being surrounded by other people that were doing it, wanted me to get into farming. But then the reason I probably got into regen farming was really health driven. So both my parents got cancer and have sadly both since passed away from cancer. And it was really that process that made me start thinking holistically about my health. And then if you extrapolate that out, you can't think about your own health holistically without thinking about the food that you're eating holistically and the way that it's grown holistically. And if you think about food growing holistically, you have to think about regenerative agriculture. So that got us thinking about that. Over to you.
I guess the only thing I would add is a little bit about my story, which was fundamentally based in a permaculture background. So my parents were permies. And so that was my childhood story and my understanding of really making decisions through frameworks that would give us the ability to live into perpetuity as a race. But then my background, Charlie's was in geology, mine was in tourism, and I ended up in agricultural tourism essentially, and just felt a bit like I couldn't really make it, or I couldn't really tell the story without feeling a bit like it was lipstick on a pig. Like, what I really wanted to see was something that was deeply connected to the integrity of how it integrated with the natural systems. And I wasn't seeing that in the tourism sector that I was working in. And so we really got to the point where we felt like we just wanted our hands in the dirt. We were homesteading. We were growing most of our own food already in our house in town. But it took us a really long time to find the right piece of land, like years and years. We wanted it to have the right slope, facing the right direction, the right type of soil at the top of a water catchment, close to a regional tourism area, and the right size. So there were lots of factors really that went into us working at what this looked like. And in the meantime, we both went and did our permaculture design certificates as adults, which was pretty life-changing. And that kind of started to stack our understanding of what systemic management looked like and what food systems looked like. We also went to the States and did a 4 or 5 month tour over there looking at local food systems in Vermont, which is in the New England part of the States, to just get an understanding of what a really vibrant local food system looks like right across the supply chain. And so we really took a lot from that and started to formulate what our business model would look like here. Yeah.
Cool. So what do you grow here? You have heritage apples. Can you tell me more about your apples? Many people these days, they don't know more than 1 or 2 apples, a green apple and a red apple. What's your favourite? Tell me about them.
Yeah, so we've got over 80 varieties of apples here. So the majority of those are heritage varieties, and really all heritage refers to it means that it's an older variety of apple. We have some of the more modern varieties like Pink Lady and Gala and Fuji. But we love the variation in apples simply because no other fruiting tree, no other fruiting variety has the variety that apples have as far as the genetic diversity or the fruiting period. So the earliest apples we have here start in January. So we start picking apples in January, and then our last apple variety we're picking in June into July. They still hang on the tree. And you can't do that with stone fruit. You can't do it with any other type of fruit. They all harvest over a really relatively short window, whereas apples harvest over 6 months. That was really appealing to us.
Vastly different.
Yeah, all the
Vastly
different flavours, different colours, different growing
Habits.
habits of the trees. So
Textures,
they're just
different sizes. Some
Yeah.
are thick, some are sweet, some are sort of textured. Yeah.
And it's the interplay too between apples and human culture, which I find fascinating. That they're such an important part of our culture. So, obviously, if you go, right back, there's the religious component with Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit being an apple, apple being the fruit associated with learning. There's the whole Johnny Appleseed thing in America, New York being the big apple. It has been an incredible part of our culture with that trade route between Asia and Western Europe. That's how apples got spread. There's so many amazing stories between apples and humans. So it's great to be part of that. It's great to keep some of those heritage varieties going, keep people introduced to them and familiar with them, because some of them are truly phenomenal apples. No good for the supermarket system, but fantastic if you're selling them fresh like we do here. We pick everything the day before it gets sold, so people get to have the true flavour of them.
Or we have pick your own.
Yeah. And some of the apples are so ugly that you would never choose to eat it just by looking at it. But when because some are russeted like a Burbosque pear, so they don't look shiny and beautiful like they do in the supermarkets. And some have really complex flavours, not just bland sweetness. So yeah, really interesting. But we don't just do apples. We also have a huge range of pears, quinces, and we also do raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, and currants.
And plums and stone fruit, nectarines and peaches.
Yeah, on a
Wow.
they're still very young on a much smaller scale, the stone fruit. Yeah.
Awesome. Back to apples. Do you have a favourite?
So Jade says that, do I have a favourite? Because she thinks I'm so
There's
predictable.
many, and he just goes to the same one every time.
No, well, so there's a variety called Prima, which for most Australians, if you say Prima, what they think about is a fruit box, is a little
box.
thing, a little
Oh,
juice
yes.
box that used to be packed in your lunchbox. No other country calls them Primas. We must have had a brand called Prima. I don't think it exists anymore. Anyway, the apple's got nothing to do with that, by the way. I don't know why it's called a Prima, but it was bred in the United States for the organic industry because it's resistant to black spot, which is the most common fungal disease of apples. So it doesn't require any sprays of any fungicides, which is why I love growing it as an organic grower, because I don't have to worry about black spot.
It's also a precocious fruiter. Within 2 or 3 years of it being put in the ground, it is abundant.
Yeah, the
You're
trees
picking
just want to
baskets.
produce fruit, and they produce heaps of fruit, and they do it reliably every year with very little love. So as an orchardist, they're amazing, but they're beautiful to eat, and they ripen early in the year as well. But yeah, so I shouldn't say tainted. My
one eye.
Yeah, no, as an orchardist, but as an eating apple, there's probably more complex apples out there. It's a beautiful sweet apple, but
Mutsu. Mine's mutsu. They're big, they're aromatic, they're so crisp when you put them in your mouth, they just split. They're super juicy. They're a little bit like a Granny Smith perhaps, or a Golden Dell. So they're a green or a yellow apple, they're not red. And as it turns out, the whole world wants red apples. We certainly know that when we're selling our nursery trees,
Yes.
the vast majority of the ones that sell are the red apples, not green apples.
Wow.
Yeah. And even when you're at the farmer's market, people will look for the more brightly coloured apples.
But there's plenty of other amazing varieties that are really incredible to eat. They're like things like Ashmead's Kernel and Cox's Orange Pippin. These are apple varieties that if a child bit into it, they'd spit it out. It's not because the flavour profile on them is really complex. So they're nearly more nutty than fruity. So of course there's that touch of sweetness, but there's all this other bound up complexity, and you never see these varieties in the supermarkets because for the average person with the average palate, they don't like eating them.
Well, also they don't store and they don't transport.
No.
So they bruise easily and they don't have a long shelf life. So they're not ideally suited to an industrial food system. But they are ideally suited to a U-pick where people can come every other week and take their apple varieties home and try all different sorts with their baskets filled.
And it's interesting the difference between European palates and preferences for apple flavours compared to American or more Australian, whereas Australian and Western culture really likes sort of just sweetness. They just want it sweet, like with very little sweet, crunchy. Whereas a lot of Europeans, they want something a bit more complex, and I think that's because they grew up on more complex apples like Belder Boskop, and Cox's Orange Pippin is very famous in England, where they're used to a more complex apple, not just a bland, sweet apple.
And they're happy for it to be softer, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So we've got the whole range though, so we cover all bases.
But then we also have berries.
Yes.
And the berries is really quite a fun part because it's a bit that, especially kids, when we have pick your own visitors and school groups come, the kids love the berries because you can just feast for 2 or 3 months of the year. We have summer berries and we have autumn berries further up the hill. And we've got quite a lot of varieties of both blackberry, raspberry, and like tayberry, silverberry, black currants, red currants. Yeah, blueberries as well.
Do you grow gooseberries at all?
We do.
We do. Yeah.
That's my favourite berry, and I want to grow
Is
that.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the gooseberry. We've got a whole row of joster berries, and we've got a couple of gooseberries down in the house garden.
Oh, there's gooseberries in there by accident.
Oh, that'd be my fault.
They look very similar to black currants
find
and
me
josters
endearing.
when they're young. So we've had a few accidentally planted in the wrong row. We've just left them there.
And I would be talking, and I would have just planted them without thinking. Anyway.
Next question. For pests, how do you organically manage them?
That is a very good question, and it's
One
one
we get asked a lot.
Because some people think that running an organic orchard is that you just hands off and you just let the pests do what they want to do, and you just eat the apples as the pests have their way with them. And to a certain degree, there's a level of just appreciating that there'll be a little bit of damage and the fruit won't be perfect. But it couldn't be really any further than the truth. I have to have a very intimate understanding of the pest pressure in my orchard, the particular insects and their life cycles, more so than an industrial orchardist that just sprays a cover spray every 2 weeks, because they don't need to understand life cycles, whereas I intimately do. So for me, the first thing I'll say with pests is it a problem? Do I need to control it? If it's just cosmetic, I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So we sell every apple we grow.
So if it doesn't impact the flavour or the taste, then I don't care if it's got a slight blemish. So that's the first thing. You just learn to live with it. Our customers are understanding. Other things like codling moth, which lays a grub, like a little caterpillar, near the apple, and then it goes inside the apple. You can't sell apples with codling moth, so I have to control codling moth. So the first thing I'll go to if I do have to control it is there a way that I can get my system, being my orchard, to manage the pest for me? So for me, that's beneficial insects and having a nice, diverse, wild orchard where I've got a proliferation of things that predate on codling moth. If that doesn't solve the whole problem, then I'll try and step in by adding extra life myself. So in the case of codling moth, we spray a virus to kill it if I need to. That basically gives the codling moth caterpillar a fatal viral cold, essentially. So it's harmless to me, it's harmless to every other insect. It's just a virus that's evolved with the codling moth larvae. So I can spray it. It's an organically allowed bioinsecticide, essentially. So that's what I'll go to if I have to, but only if I haven't been able to get the system to resolve that problem myself, or if I can't manage it just by thinking, if it's just a cosmetic issue. And then we have things like fungal diseases. Again, I'll choose varieties which are resistant to it, like I was mentioned the Prima apple variety before. The majority of our apple varieties, if not completely resistant, are partly resistant to black spot, so I don't have to worry about the fungal disease to a large point.
Why?
But then there are ways that we can manage it if I do get an outbreak. So again, this is about my understanding. I have to intimately understand the life cycle of the apple black spot fungus. I have to understand the temperature and the exact conditions when it's shooting spores up from the ground at a very particular time in spring. And then I intervene with like food-based chemicals like potassium bicarbonate, which is harmless. It's a food ingredient. But if you spray it at exactly the right time, it's antagonistic to the spreading of black spot. We've experimented with whey as well. So a byproduct of our goats. And if we need to, at very bad times, we will spray sulphur, which is just a natural element, which is an organically allowed fungicide. But again, that's my last choice because it is still really an antibiotic to a certain degree, as in it'll kill good fungus in the trees and bad fungus. So if I have to, I resort to that, but there's a whole bunch of things I try to do first.
Cool. So with whey, that would be the beneficial bacteria in the whey that would be killing the mold, wouldn't it be?
No.
No?
In fact,
is there a protein or?
No one exactly knows why the whey specifically works. They think it's got something to do with sunlight and something within the whey, and whether there's something in the whey that provides a food source on the leaf, like as an arboreal spray or a spray that goes out in the leaf canopy, that then is antagonistic. Some people think it's got something to do with maybe the pH, but there's no clear evidence to suggest why it actually works. People just know that it works. It's very effective for things like mildews on cucurbits, cucumbers. We spray it in particular. We get a lot of mildew on the currants, and it's been very effective with that. And even in very dilute forms. So a little bit goes a long, long way.
Wow, cool. How do you financially survive? I know you have your pick your own orchards with your apples and your berries, but as an aspiring farmer like me, I don't want to. The money that I'm earning, I don't want to waste it, and I want to survive on the farm so that I can be however old. How do you guys survive?
We both work off farm at the moment. We knew there would be a 10-year period where we were in our startup phase and we would have a fairly high degree of cash required. You know, the building of the barn and the establishment of the orchard and all of the irrigation needs, and just getting ourselves to the point where we had systems that worked for the broader picture of what we were trying to create would be an expensive effort. So we knew there would be 10 years that we both committed to doing off-farm work as well. But I think the other thing that we do is, we challenge everything that we spend, except maybe a dog, when the dog gets taken to the vet. That happened yesterday. We challenge everything that we spend to really, really consider whether or not this is the most effective way of spending it and whether or not it has multiple purposes and multiple outcomes. And we try and stack pretty well everything that we do. So we've got a biodiversity row down there, and so that has a biodiversity outcome. And it's the break row between berries and apples. And so that has an ecological impact, but actually a lot of the flowers that go into that biodiversity row are also sold to a florist.
Cool.
Or sold here in the barn. We grafted all of our own trees for the orchard because we couldn't necessarily get commercial scale of the varieties that we wanted, and in the process of doing that we realised that we could actually teach other people to graft. So we now run workshops around grafting, and also the other byproduct of that was that we then started to sell a whole lot more trees, and so we now have an annual nursery tree sale of heritage apples. And so we sort of stack everything that we do so that it has multiple outcomes and potentially, I guess, has a financial benefit as well. Is there anything else?
We knew when we bit this farm off that farming's a very risky business, and Stanley being an odd orcharding town, there are a lot of orchardists here, and we'd spoken to a lot of them over the years, and the really risky thing for us here financially is the climate. So we get a lot of hailstorms and potentially a lot of late frost. So for us, mitigating against those. So there's farmers here who just grew apples and they would have their whole income wiped out. They said about 1 in every 6 years, you'd lose the lot. Like you'd get no harvest, either due to frost or hail. So we went into that with our eyes wide open. We made sure we're diversified. So we sell education, value-added products and trees. So I can't get hailed out and I can't get frosted out with those three things. So
We don't just do apples either, we also do berries.
Yeah, and the berries are much more resilient because they flower and fruit within a much tighter frame. So as much as I was waxing lyrical about the romanticism of apples fruiting over 6 months, it does mean you've got this little ball of carbohydrate hanging on the tree for 6 months that's just waiting to be hailed on or eaten by a bird, which is, that's a liability. Whereas a berry flowers and then fruits within a month, or 2 months, 3 months. So, we're well diversified. We went in with our eyes wide open. We're first-gen farmers, so we're to buy the farm. We've still got a mortgage. So as Jade said, we work off farm, and we're slowly working less off farm and working more on farm. But it's a slow burn and it's hard work. We work a lot of weekends. I work late at night. I spend a lot of time with the head torch on. I won't lie, it's hard yakka, but I enjoy doing it. So for us, it's not the end of the world if I have to work hard. I like doing it.
Amazing. What are your major goals for the next 2 to 5 years?
That's a very good question, isn't it? It's funny.
To be here full time.
Yeah, we definitely would love to be on the farm full time. There's a whole bunch of stuff we want to do here. Now that the trees are starting to get up to good levels of production, we want to have more people here. We want to be selling more fruit. We want to turn our old packing shed over here into a juice processing plant. We'd love to sell fresh juice. We'd love to start doing cider as well. So there's just a whole bunch more products we'd love to do here. And another thing for us here is also not just for Jade and I to do all the work. So we have a friend who runs all the bees at the moment, and she lives in Wodonga. I did have beehives, but I was just too busy and my mind was just too involved in the orchard, and she didn't have enough space. She lives on an urban block, and I needed more hives. So it was just the perfect thing. So we now sell her honey out of the barn, but the hives are all here. So I would love to have other businesses here that we don't necessarily run, but just add to the whole thing, with some of the parts being more than the whole thing. So that's what we'd love to do as well. What about you?
Yeah, I would say activate community. Yeah, so we had a friend running our schools program for us last year, and that worked beautifully. And the dynamic of it doesn't quite work this year, but I think Charlie sort of alluded to it. We don't just want it to be the Jade and Charlie show, Jade and Charlie farm. Not even our children really are in line for succession any more than anybody else, because ultimately the land stewardship that we've taken on is about offering opportunity for the community to understand what regen farming looks like and why we need to go back to being slightly more connected, slightly more wild, slightly more evocative in the way we tell our story, and inclusive in the way we incorporate others into that story. So I think just activating community over the next couple of years is the slow burn, but it's the ultimate dream, really. We don't actually just want it to be something that we pass down to our children. We have a woofer program that runs in autumn and in spring, and some of those that have come through that program would be more well suited to running this property than any of our children. And so, succession for us looks quite different. It's really about what the land needs first and foremost. And, if there's appetite from our kids to participate in that, then that's amazing, but there's no obligation to. There are others who are eager to take on land stewardship in the way we've started.
Awesome. Would you mind showing me a couple minutes around your farm?
Sure, I'd love to.
Yes? Cool.
So we're just out the back of the barn. When we're open to the public over summer and autumn, obviously there's public all in here, and this is part of our apple tree, heritage apple tree sales. So we graft, propagate and sell a huge range of heritage apple trees. So a lot of those we sell in pots, which are available year round. But then behind the pots, you'll see over there in those timber apple crates, we sell bare-rooted apple trees. So they'll shortly go back into the ground or into pots, but they came out of our tree nursery, which you can see in the background even further behind. So we do a bare-rooted tree sale every winter, so we can post those all around the country, which is the beauty of doing bare-rooted. So that's a really important part of our farm business now, is the propagating and selling of apple trees. But we'd love to expand that even further out. We'd like to propagate and sell more berries and potentially other varieties of trees down the track too.
So you're here in September, which for some is spring, but for us it really isn't. We really do sit about a month behind everybody else because of the altitude that we sit at. And so you'll just start to see the swelling of buds on some of the currants and some of the earlier berries, but we're a much slower, shorter clipped season. We've got about a 7-month growing season and about a 5-month layover. So
yeah, we're about 750 metres above sea level, so we're quite high by Australian standards. We get snow here a few times a year, so we're very much a subalpine climate. It's very cold, but it's ideal for growing berries. Berries don't like days over 30 degrees. We don't get many days over 30 degrees. Yeah, so here we're in the berry rows. In amongst our berry rows, we have a biodiversity row. So this is the row Jade was talking about earlier that we let go a little bit more wild. It's all cut back now over winter, but if you came here in summer, it's a full row full of flowering and wild species. So it's fantastic insect habitat. And I do this in amongst the berries because we'll go for a walk amongst the apple orchard, and I can have a lot of wild or wilderness within the apple orchard, between the trees and within the rows. But because of the way the berry rows are structured, it's harder for me to have that wilderness, and that wilderness is important for beneficial insects. Yeah. So in fact, we'd like to introduce more biodiversity rows because they work so well.
They're sort of my baby, and I've pegged a few spots, but Charlie says until I'm not working full time, we can't have more. So I've got to get out of my other job.
So we can go for a walk up into the orchard as well if you want to.
And what about with snail pressure? We were talking earlier in the barn with Jade about ducks. Do you let your chickens and ducks loose here?
Yeah, so last year was the first year that we experimented with having ducks in the orchard.
And they love it.
Yeah, it was funny because they were based in the barn, and then they would leave, and then they would come back, and I don't know what you call it, the thing under their neck where they obviously store a lot of food before they digest it would be huge, swollen with snails. Oof. And their gums would all be gunked up. So yeah, they are voracious snail predators. So we'd love to have more ducks, and it is a big issue in organic orchards. It's hard to appreciate at the moment because obviously we're just coming out of the dormancy of winter, but so we don't have a lot of long grass and wildness in the orchard compared to what it looks like in spring and summer. But in summer you need to imagine by spring, we've got long grass in here. We let the drive rows go wild as well. So this is probably the neatest it's ever looked at the moment. It doesn't normally look like this. This is sort of the base case, and then everything grows up and starts to go wild over spring and summer. And we do get a lot of snails, which is the one downside.
Mainly in the berries more than the apples.
And this white stuff on the tree, what is that?
House paint.
Yeah, so when the trees are very young and they don't have a huge canopy, even though we don't get particularly hot here, we still can get the odd warm day, and it can burn the trunk. So the white is literally just diluted house paint, which acts as a sunscreen to stop the trunks getting burnt. It's really the setting oblique western sun. But these trees now are 5-6 years old, and they're getting big enough to shade themselves out.
Cool.
Do you want to talk about the underplantings?
Yeah, so you'll see in amongst the trees, we do have some underplantings of mostly comfrey and rhubarb. We're experimenting with different broadleaf plants to outcompete the perennial weeds in particular under the trees. Comfrey is very effective in some orchards we visited in North America. It's challenging here in Australia because we get so dry over summer. The comfrey doesn't like getting too dry, so we need to irrigate it to keep it alive, which we can do. The rhubarb is very productive as well and very effective in suppressing grass, and the benefit is
I can sell it.
Yeah, we can sell it. So we're looking at adding more things in between the trees, and I'd like to even potentially explore putting berries between the trees, but we haven't done that yet. But I think it'd just add to the diversity to have cane fruits, so understory fruiters, and then the trees, just so for us it's all about diversity. We've got a huge diversity of rootstocks, apple varieties, and then as you go further out, there's like this is a pear behind us, apples here. So we try and have as much diversity as possible, which just helps with our pest and disease management. Yeah, so the rows aren't straight. So a lot of commercial orchards obviously just have dead straight rows because they're much easier to manage. For us, we have curved rows. They're essentially on contour. They're slightly off contour. It's something called key line. But it's easy to understand it as they're basically on contour. So for us, it helps with water management, with the permaculture notion of soak it, slow it, soak it, spread it. So we get a lot of water coming off the road and it hits these rows, and these soils, we basically get no runoff, everything infiltrates. So we try and store as much water on site as possible, even though we are irrigated. We don't have to use the irrigation that often at all. It was really just while the trees were young, but now that they're established.
It also helps with fertigate the irrigation lines.
Yeah, so we do fertigate through the irrigation lines. So within the irrigation water from time to time, we add things like fish hydrolysate, seaweed, and our own compost teas that we brew here on the farm, and other biology that we brew. And I find as far as the pick your own goes, having curved rows, it creates a lot more interest. If you imagine, it's hard to imagine why the trees are all dormant at the moment, but once they're all in leaf, you've got these avenues that you can't see the end of from one end. So you've got this sense of mystery, and kids particularly love to run through them because they don't know what's around the corner. So it's not just the productive element, it's also the beauty and the more artistic side of having curved rows. There's something about it that's just so much more beautiful than a hard straight line.
And these are apples or?
They're pears.
No, they're pears, they're Nashi pears. That's an unpruned tree. We haven't actually finished up pruning this year, but the Nashi's highly productive. They love this climate and the trees just want a fruit. So I try and work on the maxim that it's pointless me trying to proliferate varieties or types of things that struggle in this environment. We've worked out through this process what is happy to grow here and what's happy to fruit here, and we've just planted more of it. I read a great line years ago, I think it was Mark Shepherd that said it, that a lot of farmers spend a lot of time trying to kill stuff that wants to live and trying to keep stuff alive that just wants to die. So for us, I just find the things that want to live here, that are highly productive here, and we just keep proliferating those. If they're too wussy or they're not strong enough, given the way we grow, then they're just gone. I'll just get rid of them.
Like cherries.
Yeah, so cherries were a classic. They needed a lot of love. You can grow them organically in this climate, and people do, but they require a lot of chemicals, even if they're organic chemicals. And for us, there's a big difference between commodity organics and the way we farm. So there's a lot of organic chemicals I don't even like to use and I don't want to use. I'd prefer to have as much processing as far as management of the things we need done on site. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do a lot of our own composting. We do a huge amount of composting, and that and compost teas form the basis of our nutrient program. We do bring in things like fish hydrolysate and a few other products, but on the whole, we try to resolve our nutritional needs on farm. All of these apple varieties that you can see are all either heritage varieties or some of the more recent ones like Pink Lady and Gala. And they're all varieties that are quite reasonably well known across the world in different places. But we've got another row a bit further up that we're just establishing that we call Feral Alley. And what that is basically a collection of roadside apple trees that people have collected across Australia. Oh. So apples, like humans, reproduce sexually. So if I planted the seed of a Pink Lady apple, it'll grow a tree that won't produce Pink Lady apples because the flower that produced that seed had to be pollinated by another apple variety. Apples aren't self-fertile. They need another variety to pollinate them. So every seed that comes out of an apple is the offspring of two different types of apple trees. So it has mixed genetics. So every time you throw an apple core out the window, if those seeds take, it's a brand new variety. So brand new genetics. Most wild-side apple trees you see, unless someone intentionally planted a grafted tree, that is brand new genetics. It's a brand new variety of apple. Most of them are terrible, granted, but there's the odd few that are actually beautiful, incredible eating apples. And it's just a fluke, like they're just brand new genetics. And so there's the odd few people that collect that genetics and then share it amongst other apple enthusiasts. So we've got a whole 3 rows actually in the next block, which are all collected roadside apple trees.
Wow.
So outside of that roadside location, it's probably the only spot in the world where you can sample and try that apple. So eventually we'll have little plaques that shows where the original roadside apple tree is, and then we've taken a cutting of it and grafted it onto new rootstock. So eventually you'll be able to pick apples in a feral apple row, which I think is really cool. And it's important to keep the genetics because some of them are amazing, not only because they taste good, but also to survive as an apple tree in the wild, you have to be tough. So to be a tough apple tree that produces good tasting apples, that's genetics worth keeping.
Definitely.
So we're in amongst our raspberry and blackberry rows here. So we have a large variety of raspberries. We've probably got about 6 or 7 types of raspberries, about the same in blackberries and about the same in blueberries. Raspberries are relatively difficult to manage from a weed control point of view if you're growing organically. So obviously we can't use a lot of the chemicals that are available to control grasses in particular that commercial orchardists grow. So we rely on a lot of mulch, a lot of compost, and this year we experimented as well with using sheep in winter to help control particularly clover, which has worked really well. For us it's experimentation, trying all sorts of different things. We let our hedgerows get relatively thick and that helps control the grass as well. And there's also a fair bit of hard yakka, so there's just a lot of hand weeding done as well. This cultivated section down here is our tree nursery, so that's where we graft and, I do the grafting indoors, but then the grafted trees get planted out into that nursery. So that's where we grow out all of the apple trees that we then sell. We've just had the sheep in there. They help us with our weed control and nutrient cycling. Shortly we'll be grafting and then putting all of our grafted trees in there over the growing season. Then they come out when they're dormant next year and then we sell them bare rooted. So a large part of our nutrient supply for the orchard we do here ourselves with large compost heaps at various stages of decomposition. So we get in a lot of wood chips from power line clearing companies and from local council whenever we can, and we compost that. It's important for us this well rotted woodsy compost, which encourages a really fungal dominated soil, which is important for orchards. Given that this was a cleared pasture before we started farming it, which is bacterially dominated, we need to add consistently this rotting woodsy material to create good fungal environments around the trees, which is what they're evolutionary used to doing. So we also add a lot of nitrogen sources to these. So anytime we have dead animals on the farm, we bury them in here. Anytime we can source roadkill, we'll put it in our wood chip pile. Nice. Just to try and bring in as many free nutrient sources as possible. So for us this is a really important part of our farm and an important part of our nutrient management.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with me. I don't know how long it's been, but it's gone by quickly, and I've learned a lot, more than I expected, really. You guys, thank you for spending your time, lending your time for me, and you have a website. Where can people online, where can they find you? You have an Instagram, you have even a podcast.
So blackbarnfarm.com.au is our website. black_barn_farm is our Instagram handle, which is the same as Facebook. And then the podcast is called Future Steading, Living Like Tomorrow Matters, which is not really our story. It's really about how everybody else is living like tomorrow matters. And that's everyone from healthcare practitioners through to energy healers, through to regen farmers, old people, young people, people overseas, people here, authors. Yeah, good cohort of about 150 interviews.
Or you can visit us on farm when we're open for Pick Your Own, which is normally mid-December right through until April, May. And we have a series of workshops and other homesteading classes and bits and pieces throughout the year as well.
Okay, I'll put all of that in the description box down below. And that's it. So thank you for watching, people on YouTube. Like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you next video. Bye.